Welcome to the Startup Operator Podcast. I'm Roshan Karyappa. Today on the podcast, we have an entrepreneur who's executing in a very unique sector, the sericulture or silk rearing ecosystem. Mayank Tiwari is the co-founder of Resha Mandi that recently raised Series A of 30 million to streamline the farm to fashion ecosystem. Mayank's team has grown from 12 to 170 over the last year, and they're solving a wide range of problems from production to distribution in a full stack manner. In this conversation, I tried to understand some of the nuances of operating in this space, how Mayank and his team are working with various personas in the ecosystem, like farmers, weavers, distributors, and retailers. This was a fascinating conversation, and there's tons of insights in here that you may find useful. So let's dive into this episode of the Startup Operator Podcast with Mayank of Resha Mandi. Hey Mayank, welcome to the Startup Operator Podcast. Thank you so much for making the time.
Thanks, and thanks for inviting us.
Yeah, and happy Dasara as well.
Yeah, happy Dussehra. Yeah, it's been a pleasant surprise on the Dussehra.
Yeah, holiday weekend. You're making time for us, so it's extra special. Thank you again. Mayank, I'd love to understand a lot more about Resha Mandi, but I think it would be really helpful for our listeners to take a step back and set some context in the space in which you operate, right? So could you help us understand the lay of the land? What does this whole farm to fabric ecosystem look like, and who are the various personas?
See, farm to fashion is a broad term. We started working in the silk supply chain, but there are other natural fibers that we plan to expand into. Now, what happens in any of the natural fiber is because there is a grassroots farmer available with you, you need to work with them. Then it has to be drawn out, like the produce has to be drawn out into yarns. In silk's case, there are reelers. In cotton's case, you will have a ginning and a spinning unit. These folks are basically drawing out the yarns. Yarns have various strengths, various deniers, various quality measurement tools, and then it finally converts into a fabric. This fabric is what we see as the end product as a consumer. Now, what happens in this balance is there could be, like in silk specifically, what happens is you have a finished product in terms of sari, while you also have a fabric getting produced. So there are various different types of units that you need to work with, and you are also working with various types of buyers. So if a Zara is working with you, they won't work with you on a finished product. They will work with you on the fabric side, and they'll have specifications, and they'll have a certain benchmark quality that they'll be looking for, and you need to work towards it. While if you're working with a SME segment retailer, somebody out of Chickpet, their requirement is specific. They have a very different audience that is coming to them, and you need to understand that audience to be able to help them understand what kind of product will sell or not sell. So that's the lay of the land. You are looking at a 3000 plus year old industry in terms of
Yeah.
silk. In India, it has there have been researches which basically says that silk didn't start from China. It actually started from India.
Yeah.
From our Vedic traditions, it has been there. Mulberry, which is the plant. In Rigved, it's said that every household should have one mulberry plant, and in Hindi it is called Shaitut. Mulberry is a fruit as well. I don't know if any of your listeners would have even had the pleasure of having it, but it's a great fruit. It's almost like a blueberry, and it's a berry fruit, right? So there are various use cases, Ayurvedic properties, and otherwise that is available in Mulberry. And our idea was to explore what this ecosystem looks like, bring together a digitization to it, but don't restrict ourselves to becoming a platform. We wanted to become an ecosystem, and that's the play that we are moving forward with.
Right. All right. So with that very interesting background, let's speak about Resha Mandi. You're a fashion technology graduate. You studied apparel production at NIFT. But, we spoke earlier that, you did deviate from that and you did a bunch of other roles in design and sales at tech companies, right? So before finding your way back to fabric and all of what you're doing right now. So how did you find inspiration to come back? What is the founding story of Resha Mandi?
The founding story of Resha Mandi lies in the cluster development program that I did in my college days around 2004-5. Ministry of Textiles asked us to go to various clusters in India, art clusters, craft clusters, and be able to contemporize them and make sure that they get the market linkage. Now, this was a 7 days, 8 days program. Government is paying for it, and we were very happy. We were thrilled. We went there, but of course the research happened, everything happened, right? But one thing that I did was basically I bought myself 2 shirts from that village. The shirt costed me around 350 rupees. Stitched shirt, hand and block prints, and handloom cotton. came over to Mumbai and I was trying to find the same print. Wasn't able to. The only places I could find it were the organized retailers like Fab India or Bombay Store. They were selling it at probably the 10x pricing.
Yeah.
Right? The fabric was costing so much. And I was surprised to see that there is so much of disparity in terms of the pricing that you can find in the rural parlance versus what happens in Mumbai. I did my graduation project also on the same line, which was Indian handicrafts from craftsman to consumer. Idea was to bring together a bunch of weavers, artisans together, create a range, and be able to supply to a value chain retailer. In this case, it was Big Bazaar. We were able to do a women's wear ethnic range for them, and then it sold like a hotcake from there. The cost price being around 180 rupees with 10-15% margin given out to the vendors and things like that. So that problem statement kind of stayed on. The identification of that problem statement happened early on. I moved on with my career. I went to Ogan, then I went to Novica.com, which is basically in association with NatGeo, and it was an e-commerce site. Then I started something of my own in terms of next steps research and development, where we were basically trying to bring out event-based IPs and help artisans and viewers get access towards the retailers and e-commerce players. Now, in that case, when we were trying to work with them, because it was an event-based IP, it requires the physical location to be present. It requires people to come together, and I didn't had a knowledge of digital as such, right? So, post that I shifted, and that's the story you were talking about. That I shifted my career. I literally shifted my career towards user experience and IT side, and wanted to learn that how the product gets created, how do you scale the products digitally, and things like that. Joined a small boutique firm called Inconic, scaled it, worked with them as the director of sales and strategy, and kind of worked with various clients, understood different problem statements, and worked with BFSI customers to e-commerce players to security players. There were so many different problem statements. One way you're looking at a security solution to be created, while on the other side, when you're working with an e-commerce player, they're going after a GMV, they need to hog onto that bandwagon. And you're defining problems, you're solving for it, and then you're redefining the problems. And that kind of got my juices flowing. So post that, I started as a management consultant, worked with few SME companies and startups across Bangalore and Goa, helping them set up user experience strategies, helping them go to market and things like that. But the genesis of the problem statement kind of stayed with me, and I wanted to solve for it. Never wanted to solve for it through just by calling myself a marketplace or a managed marketplace. I wanted to solve it from the lens of making an ecosystem where Tata solves your different problems. It gives you a salt, and it also is now going to give you, probably predominantly in this case, they are going to be the only player, right? So they're trying to solve for various problems. They're not solving one problem in your life. They're trying to become your life. That's the idea, and that's the whole point of bringing in Resha Mandi. This audience needs to get educated around natural fibers. You need to be able to appreciate what happens in natural fiber industry, and with the transparency and the trust and the technology that you build, it kind of propagates that idea. So that's the whole point of Resha Mandi.
Right. So it's a fantastic idea, but going from idea to product to company is a whole other journey, right? I mean, for people who are listening to this, I mean, and they may have their own ideas as well. How do you start taking those baby steps towards actually making this into a tangible reality?
I always tell people one thing: think and do, don't overthink. Normally, what we do is we procrastinate on our idea. Generally, people have this, oh, if I launch this product, this one feature, and then I will launch. And that one feature never gets built. That whole Northern Star metrics that you have put in your mind never happens until you experiment on it. So we registered our company on 13th of May. We did our first trade on 1st of June. We never had the platform. We never had anybody. I didn't had any staff. My kid was around 1 year old. My wife and I used to travel to farmlands to meet the farmers in the night at around 9:30 as well. I used to frequent to the farmlands at one call of a farmer. I would go 20-30 kilometers away from my house at 9:30 in the night just to procure. I just wanted to make sure that the farmers understand that I am coming from a place where I'm ready to support them at any time. And that kind of stayed on. So today, when the team works with the farmers or the reelers or the viewers or the retailers, we are always available. And that has been the genesis of Resha Mandi. We built like that. The other factor is we realized various different problem statements in this supply chain. One of them is a very softer touch of it, right? You understand the problem statement. Okay, TAM is this, that, blah blah, right? That's all VC talking. That's one part of the story. The other part of the story is, what is the softer touch? How do people relate to you? So people relate to us with a cup of tea, because we offer chair to a farmer and we offer them a cup of tea before talking to them. That allows them to, if you go to Sarjapur today and you talk to any of the silk sericulture farmers there and tell them that you're coming from Resha Mandi or you know Resha Mandi, they will treat you as if you are the guest in their house. That happened only because we treat them equal. So things like that is what allowed us to shape it like a company. We didn't think that we'll grow this fast, we'll grow this big, this fast. Nobody thought of it. We're now a 170 people team. 10 months back, we were a 12 people team in December. And November, we were basically 3 co-founders and 2 people on the ground. That's it. So the whole thing happened very, very fast. We spiraled onto our revenues, we spiraled onto our teams, and it just came together, is what I would say. Our teams, all benefit should go towards the leadership that we have. They have been super supportive. We hired people from a lens of, can we trust them? If I hire, like I have a guy called Devesh who heads our agri business, and we've known each other since 2009. We worked together in Next Steps, and I knew his capability. He was with Lakme at the time when I offered him. He was about to get promoted, but he left everything and came over just because he thought that the story has the relevance. He'll be able to make wealth with us. And that's how he scaled our agribusiness. So we can completely rely on him. I don't even have to look into on a daily basis as to what is happening in agribusiness. Similarly, that's the way we kind of made the yarn business, the fabric business. Now we're making our byproduct business. It's the same scale that we're looking at.
Right.
That's all.
Yeah, that's amazing actually. So in many ways, before you even had a full-fledged product, you already sold the value, you built relationships, right? And yeah, what you speak about early teams is so apt because, going from 12 to 170, I mean, it can very quickly spiral into chaos if you don't have these people that you can completely decentralize and trust, right? So that's a very important point that you bring up. So Resha Mandi serves multiple customer personas within this ecosystem, right? So for our understanding, who are your various customers? What are their challenges? And why do they work with Resha Mandi?
So we work with a Chaki rearing farm. We start from there. We work with disinfectant producers, primarily factories, chemical producers. Supply that to the farmers. Now, the Chaki rearing center is basically they are taking the egg as the input and hatching out a larva. The larva goes to the farm. Now, the farmer has a mulberry plantation with him and a rearing shed. In a mulberry plantation, he's basically rearing the mulberry. At the shrub level, they cut it and they start feeding that on a 21-day cycle to a silkworm. Silkworm converts into a cocoon. Cocoon then goes to a reeling unit. Reeling units are when you're boiling those cocoons and drawing out the yarn. That's that age-old practice. And the yarn then are either twisted or not twisted, dependent on what is the variety of the fabric or the sari is getting produced. And the weavers then back channels their demand accordingly. Then the weavers kind of produce either the fabric or the sarees or any of the product that they're looking for. That finally gets finished and goes to the retailers. And by the time it is at the retail store in Chickpet is when you or me will go into a Chickpet market and buy a silk saree. That's the whole supply chain. Now, why do all of them work with us is because we solve for each of their individual problems. We don't really see the supply chain as, there is a one core problem to it. No, there is one core problem, which is something that's more of a trade secret, so I don't want to reveal it. But yeah, apart from that, there are other problem statements across each of the supply chain. Like one of the problem statements of the Chaki rearing center is that they had customer churn, right? And if you are my vendor, very simply, if you are my vendor, and I get anything failed in my production system, who's to blame? You are my input provider. I'll blame you straight on, right? And that's what happens with a CRC center, primarily because the farmers, the moment they get a crop failure, they'll blame them. but nobody had the data handle as to who is at fault, right? Whether the farmer had even put in the right amount of quality of inputs, or in terms of process, has he followed it, or has he maintained the temperature and humidity, to be able to blame that to CRC. So what we do is we assure the quality at the CRC level. We have a certain SOP we work with. Our team on a weekly, bi-weekly basis kind of audits these CRCs, surprise audits, making sure that they're following our SOPs. If they don't follow our SOP, they're blacklisted in the day one. We don't supply their inputs anymore. While on the farmer side, we also give them IoT devices, which basically allows them to maintain the temperature and humidity controls. It also allows them to grow the mulberry with lesser water intake and have higher yield production. Similarly, if you go towards the reeling and the weaving centers, there are various other problem statements that we are solving. The weavers, if somebody is sitting in Banaras, had to rely on a couple of traders. The trading mechanism was so exorbitant that you will have at least 3-4 traders in between reeler in Ramnagar to a weaver in Banaras. So we kind of disintermediate that completely by being able to work with the reeler and the weaver directly. So that allows the cost benefit to get passed on to both of them while we are making profits. So these are the various kind of nuanced problem statements that we have found.
Hi, you can get back to the podcast in less than a minute, but before that, remember when news wasn't in your face and out to get you? Much of what qualifies as news today are clickbaity headlines, unresearched opinions, and unnecessary speculation. News used to be boring. And that's why you should subscribe to The Boring News at boringnews.co. You get one free daily email newsletter with a fact-first bullet-style reporting that focuses on informing you on all things relevant. The writing style gives it to you straight. They don't have a voice. Why? Because in their words, if you can be trusted to vote at 18, we trust you to make your own opinions as well. I've subscribed to The Boring News and I find it extremely valuable. It's how I start my mornings. So go ahead and subscribe to The Boring News. That's boringnews.co. You won't regret it. Right. So as you're describing this, right, I realize that, you're solving many different problems for many different people, and you're solving for the entire ecosystem in a very full stack fashion, right? And this is somewhat contrary to, what we see in more mature tech ecosystems where you execute within a narrow scope and you do that really well, right? So you don't do everything for everybody. At least that's the conventional wisdom. Did you ever think of stopping at one or two personas or running that managed marketplace that you spoke about? I mean, it seems like a far easier thing to do, right? So why did you end up solving for everything from production to distribution? And, what was the decision making like?
Let's just say we wanted to achieve the impossible. No, but the fun fact around is if we didn't solve for the entire ecosystem, or we didn't solve for the entire supply chain, what would have happened is I wouldn't have even able to give out a transparent quality outlook. We control quality across these parameters. So by the time the supply goes out to the retailers and to the consumer, we know exactly where it got produced from. We know where the yarn came from, where we know where the cocoon came from, where we also know where the chaki came. And we know why that one knot is available on that sari and why is it not a very smooth silk. We know those problem statements and we are trying to solve and make sure that there is more efficiency being put up. If I wouldn't have solved for entire thing, like the maximum margin is of course towards the viewer and the retailer side of the story. You will always get that, right? And everybody has been solving for that. Not solving, let's just say that everybody is just disintermediating one trader and coming in between themselves, right? That's the simple story around that. We never just wanted to become that. We just didn't want it to become one trader. Nobody perceives us as a trader. We are perceived as a technology provider. So that's the whole idea of why full stack.
But how does that flow into your teams and the way products operate, right? I mean, it's multiple products, multiple different teams working with different people all together, right? So how do you bring everything together?
We have a system which is a homegrown system called Operation Command Center. It's a CRM and a ERP system that we have built ourselves. We started that with Cocoon Trade. We experimented a lot on it. Should we have bid? Should we not have bid? But We build, we test, we move on. We build, we test, we move on. Every time we've done that, we don't necessarily look at 4 week cycle for a product release to happen. No, our releases happen on a daily basis. So if today the business says that I am getting constrained only because I don't have this feature, my technology team is that sharp that they'll build out that feature in next 2 days and shut that guy out in the meeting. And the next time when he's saying that I need this feature and he's not utilized the last one, the technology team has the upper hand asking him questions as to did you hit the KPI or not? So it's an open door policy at Resha Mandi. Anybody can ask any questions. So a technology software engineer can pretty much walk into a vertical head's office and say, listen, boss, are you meeting your KPI? Because I just released your feature. And a business guy can walk into a finance guy's office and say, listen, boss, where is my money? What are you doing? Right? I did this much of collection. So people question each other, and that's the camaraderie we have. It allows us to be open. It allows us to be transparent. And it also allows the team to come together. And that allows Resha Mandi to grow.
Right. But again, there must be like an endless stream of problems that you can solve for, right? So how do you sort of prioritize and how do you close the loop?
Okay, so from the problem statement standpoint, what happens is we have a strategy team which basically does all sorts of different experiments. But those are not operational or commercial decisions that we are making. We are making small experiments. So when we wanted to start the pupa business, which is basically the byproduct that comes out of the reeling unit, Krishna kind of took it on himself, built that model one bit by one bit, took him 3 months, looked at logistics, looked at operations, looked at sales. What would be the selling criteria? What would be the sourcing criteria? How would I get it processed? How will I get it transported? Things like that. Once it got solved for, and we have done a couple of trades through the strategy team, is when we basically have the SOP with us. We know exactly what you need to look for in your customer. We know exactly what you need to look for in your vendor. We know what the process would be. We will pass on this knowledge to the vertical, handhold them for a month before commercializing it. So
Right.
it allows us to keep things under the wrap until the time we are very, very sure that this could be scaled.
Right. So let's speak about the production aspect of things, right? So we often hear that, agriculture and farming yield in India is subpar and for a variety of reasons, right? I was actually surprised to know that we import silk. This is a country, as you mentioned, I mean, we have a rich history of sericulture, even dating back to Indus and Harappa civilizations as well, right? Even up to 15th century, there's a lot of silk being generated in India and exported to the world, right? What is lacking in our production capabilities and, how are you solving these problems around standardizing yield? And you mentioned controlling quality and stuff, right? I mean, it seems like a very complex problem. So if you could explain some of this stuff.
So I will give you a different context there. So if you try and solve the quality problem at the weaver side, the problem is more about whether he is putting the right warp and right weft into the production to be able to get the right quality of fabric out. But for him to not get the knot on the fabric, right? That's one of the quality problems that you have to go back to the chart. Make sure that the mulberry that is fed to the silkworm had optimal moisture content in it, so that the cocoon, when it is getting formed, the silkworm is not stopping for that microsecond in between, because that will have a drawage problem when the yarn is getting formed, and that will have a problem at the fabric level. It's a very nuanced problem to solve, like you said, but it's a step that you need to take towards it. There are hundreds, probably thousands of research that India has done. Central Silk Board has done a phenomenally well done job on the research that they have. CSTRI has done a lot of research, and there is ample amount of data available for India to be, pushing itself towards becoming the global power in silk. The challenge, however, is the mindset of the stakeholders themselves. Now, what happens is, if imagine you are a stakeholder or you're a farmer, right, and you want to grow your rearing center because nobody has backed your transaction at any given point in time, and you don't file for taxes because you're a farmer. Hence, the banks don't come to you and support you for that capex. You become underserved from that standpoint. Hence, you have only so much of capability. While a farmer is ready to actually explore his capabilities further, right? So what we are trying to now build, and this is one of the problem statement we found over the last 15 to 16 months, right? So now what we are trying to build is our fintech layer. We are calling it Resha Mudra. Idea is that we will do the stakeholder financing ourselves. We'll help them with the receivable payable financing. We'll help them with their working and capital management and allow them to foray further and further on. Because when we did the bottoms up calculation on India and silk supply chain, we realized that India has a potential of around $75 billion worth of trade to happen, while
Wow.
we today do anywhere close to $10 billion. This is the
Crazy.
government data and not so government data combined together telling you that figure. There's so much of gap, and India is yet to come onto the global parlance. So looking forward to that. Let's see.
Amazing. So, that ties with what I was going to ask you, which is, we often hear that agriculture and farming, again, is not very lucrative for the masses at large to practice as a profession, right? And as a result, it's not very aspirational as well. I mean, you find centuries old tradition of weaving and rearing and so on breaking, right, with the newer generation. How are you ensuring, that it becomes aspirational again, viable again? And how are you ensuring fair market prices for some of these people in the ecosystem?
Sure, that great question. How many acres of land do you have? Please reach out if you have an acreage of land. We'll take it on rent. 1 acre of mulberry plantation, and if you have a 2,000 square feet of space which is built, you don't have to invest too much. Can yield you anywhere close to 1.25 to 1.5 lakh a month. That's a massive income. And we are able to work with the farming community more. The more we support them. There was an experiment we did with Fasal, which is also an agri-tech company.
Yeah, we had them on the podcast. So Ananda was on the podcast.
Okay. So Shalin's a great friend. Shalin's my NIF junior as well. We work together at Enconic. Now, when I reached out to him, I said, listen, my farmers are, I think, wasting water. I think we are. We installed his devices in 5 farms and we started advising the farmers saying, no, please don't irrigate. No, please don't irrigate. Now farmers are getting pissed. On a daily basis, somebody is picking up a phone and telling him, please don't irrigate. We as Indians are so used, because we've seen it from our childhood, right? That somebody will go take that bullock cart into the farmlands and then irrigate the field and all that will happen, right? So we are so used to our traditional practices that if somebody comes in and say, listen, don't irrigate, you will have better yield. They don't believe you for the first month. Next month you say, okay, you've done your things. Now just follow me. If you don't get the yield that you're expecting, I will pay for it. Then they will do it. They started doing it. Realized after a couple of months, me and Shailendra realized that we saved 70% water on the, and we have increased their yield by around 40 to 50% of the mulberry crop. That allows them to now come back to our ecosystem and ask us, can you give me some bit of loan so that I can start, putting up another rearing shed? Similar thing happens when you go to a reeler or you go to a weaver. Now, when we work with a reeler and we are able to increase their quality from 2A grade yarn to a 4A grade yarn, the difference between them is around 1,000 to 1,200 rupees per kg. A 2A grade yarn would sell lesser price. And of course, 4A grade yarn is a higher quality and a higher price. Same reeler in India is able to produce a 4A grade, which is now competing against China. And China's pricing is anywhere around 20 to 25% higher than Indian yarn's pricing. Now he is able to extract that margin. Because he's extracting that margin, he's coming back to you saying, okay, let's do insurance, let's do banking, let's do this, let's do that. They themselves are coming, right? So that kind of allows us to make sure that there is a stickiness, we are able to engage, and we solve for it at one step at a time.
I think quite a few people listening to this might actually consider, rearing mulberry after this. So,
okay, we are pretty much open. Please reach out to anybody in the team. We are pretty open on LinkedIn. Anybody can reach out to us, and more than happy to help you. We'll take it on rent, no worries.
So, on a more serious note, right? You mentioned the Central Silk Board, and indeed the government has been building a lot of this data and insights around production and everything. But you're playing a very vital role in this entire ecosystem where you're kind of streamlining all of this, you're bringing this data, making it accessible to everyone and providing the means and resources, right? So what has it been like working with these government folks and regulators? I mean, are they the typical, what do you say, I mean, the usual Sarkari types who are slow and not so keen to innovation, or is that a misnomer that all of us have?
No, I think government has been supportive of us. It's never been, if we've asked something from the government, it's primarily about getting some introductions or making sure that we are understanding their research correctly or doing some kind of a research together or trying to work together to solve one problem which nobody is able to understand, nor us, nor them. So it just allows us to foster that relationship and move forward.
Right. So we've spoken a fair bit about Resha Mundi and the ecosystem in which you operate, right? Again, just to summarize for the layperson who would want to build in this space, what are some nuances of operating in your sector?
If you want to do something on your own in Silk, right now, I think it'll be very hard. But if you do plan to get into Silk as an industry, then please make sure that you understand the problem statements which are deep enough. This is not an industry which will...
You can't just wet your feet and like...
Yeah. So basically, there are industries, right, where you can test your product hypothesis and move on. No. Your one trade will tell the world what you are. And if people don't trust you on that one trade, nobody would trust your platform ever again. So you need to build that trust. The layer of trust has to be built from the day one. So your problem statement definition has to be very, very deep rooted. And like I said, there is one problem statement I'm not telling anybody. That's the trade secret of Resha Mundi. Right. That's how Resha Mundi operates. So you need to find that problem statement. Once you found that problem statement, solve for it. And if you're able to solve for that problem statement, I think rest of it is auxiliary problems. You will start solving for it as they come along. And then there will be 100 people backing you who will be ready to support you, will be ready to take your company to a next level and next level and next level. So automatically things happen.
Amazing. So what are your plans for the future? You know, as you mentioned, I don't think you're beholden to silk. You might move to other fabrics, perhaps cotton or so. What does the future look like? What does the next 2 years look like?
What does the next 2 years look like? Like I said, we've grown too soon, too fast. In the sense, every month in Resha Mundi is a new month. We create a business plan, then it fails because we've outgrown it. So we've created another one with this round. I'm hoping that it will be again the same story that happens. But what it looks like is that in the next 6 months we'll start experimenting with other fibers. That's one thing that will happen for sure. The second thing that will happen is we'll start probably in next 1 year, start foraying into international market from supply and the demand perspective.
Right. So, you know, Resha Mundi is about a year old and you've just raised Series A of 30 million. You've spoken about plans for the future. And at some level, you know, the founder's growth also mirrors the startup's growth, right? What are some high-level challenges you are solving for as a founder yourself?
Well, I'm trying to grow as myself as a CEO here. I've never been CEO in my life ever. So for me, Utkarsh or Saurabh, I think for us to fit into those roles is taking time. We are ourselves looking for guidance every time as to, you know, how do we solve for it? People expect answers. You don't have answers. And it's good that you don't have answers because you can be upfront about it. Like I'm 120% upfront about that with my team members. I tell them, I don't know 100% of your questions getting answered. I'm not very sure. What I can help you for sure with is I can try and find this answer through my ecosystem. Yes, I have a well-connected ecosystem that I can help you. Yeah, we're trying to basically get into our own roles. We're trying to understand, like people used to tell me earlier that there are CEOs 0 to 1, 1 to 100 and 100 and beyond. I really don't know whether our journey is 0 to 1 or a 1 to 100 journey or a 100 and beyond journey right now. For me, it's always an evolving journey and I am always a 0 to 1 guy. So for me, every day is a day zero. So I'm trying to solve for new problems.
Yeah, no, that's actually a fascinating thing, you know. I mean, how founders tend to grow and operate in this when there's a lot of ambiguity and there's no perfect information, right? I mean, it's phenomenal to see this transformation up close. So Mayank, this has been a fascinating conversation. We could go on for more time, but I'm going to leave you to enjoy your holiday weekend. Before we sign off, what are some books or podcasts that you would recommend?
Books or podcast, of course. You're great.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for that. I'm not a very great reader, but whatever far and few titles in between that I've read, The Hard Things About Hard Things.
Okay, that's a recurring theme on the podcast.
No, I think it's quite apt.
Yeah, it is.
For the challenges that lie ahead.
Yeah, absolutely. Cool. Thank you so much, Mayank. This was a fantastic chat, and all the best for everything that you have coming up, and look forward to speaking with you shortly again.
Thank you so much. Thanks for calling in. Bye-bye. Take care.
Thank you so much for listening. If you liked this episode, then don't forget to subscribe to us on your favorite platform and share this episode with all of your fellow startup operators. Also, follow the Startup Operator on LinkedIn and Twitter for more updates. Stay safe, take care, and see you soon on a brand new episode of the Startup Operator.